I'm going to talk about some APL people that I knew. Um, and I thought I might give myself a running start by mentioning who I am. My name's Charles Brenner, but that's not the point. First of all, Holden, I chatted with him at lunch, and it turns out that I had an opportunity to start with computing as young as he did, but it fell through my fingers. My father was working at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in 1955, I think it was. And once he took me into the into the office or whatever it was, and there was this traditional huge room, about like this size, with the ENIAC computer. And so I looked at it and I thought it was a wonderful thing. And there was some paper tape with little holes in it. And I asked one of the guys there, one of the men there, what that was. And he said it was code, which I took as brushing me off. Like, you know, we can't tell you. It's a code. This is the government. So I lost my opportunity. I'm sure that if I'd acted, you know, like a precocious kid, they'd been delighted to tell me how to do this. And before you'd know it, I'd been able to do long division with a computer. So let me see how this is working. Let me try something. Oh, then, I'm sorry, the other point of this was a great thing. So I had a great opportunity in 11th grade of able to get access to the computer. I was living in Palo Alto for high school, and Stanford was just across the street from our high school. And by luck, Professor Forsyth, who later became maybe the original person to have a computer science or computing section path. He was a mathematician originally. So I could sign up and have 30 minutes worth of time on the computer per week, assuming the thing was working. Stanford had one computer, IBM 650, and it was up about 85% of the time. But that got better when we replaced it with a better computer and so on. And that's why, IBM, it was our fault that IBM sort of dropped out of some 60 years later. Okay, that one doesn't matter. So somehow or other, I was over at Stanford. Maybe I was in my last year there or the year before that. And at the computer center, and this fellow, Larry Breed, was also in the make-ready room, and he had a cast on his right arm, which was terrifically important because he was left-handed, you see. He couldn't make it as a Canadian, so he was left-handed. And he had a watch on his left hand, which wasn't the usual place for it, I guess. But because of the cast, not only was there, but he couldn't wind it. How many of you know what it means to wind a watch? Okay. Wait a minute, I got to count. So he asked me to wind his watch. That's how we met. So I wound his watch, pretty good at that, and because I'm a righty, you see. And then I noticed something really strange, which was that the little hand and the hour hand and the bigger and the minute hand weren't consistent. They were off. I don't mind that he had the hour hand 6 hours off, because it's quite possible that this Stanford guy can do arithmetic. But anyway, I fixed it for him. And then he got sort of upset and told me that was the wrong thing to have done, and so on. And so I was a little bit embarrassed. And let's see, then what's the story? I think maybe I have a note. Yeah, here's the whole story. Sorry, I should have showed it for you. So yeah, the minute hand wasn't synchronized with the hour hand. And so I was chagrined, and the whole thing, however, had a denouement, which we'll come to. Okay. What happened next was that we got to be friends and maybe did a little computer work, and unknown to me, he became knowledgeable about APL. So when I graduated, he invited me to come out to IBM, T.J. Watson Center or something like that. What's the full word? It was for research, and it was this beautiful building, which I can't get a beautiful picture of, but you can see over there, I didn't remember it as round. I remembered it as being an arc in the back, and I guess an arc in the front. And in the back, you could look down over this wide, well, you can see the front part here, but if you look over the back where you can't see, there's a hill going down and it's all grass. Very nice place to be working. And I was there for the summer, but it was so much fun that I stayed around for 8 months and delayed my graduate school start in London until April of the next year. And in the meantime, so I started learning APL. And Ken Iverson was there, and this is about what he looked like then. Maybe this was when he was still in Harvard, I don't know. And so I'll tell you a little about Ken. I didn't get to know him very well. He was the boss of Larry, and Larry was the boss of me. Oh, sorry, there's an anecdote that half of you know. And that's why I said, Larry, son of a bitch. That was Ken's word. The story was that he said, I guess Larry pitched himself to Ken. And he showed, and apparently he found a typographical error, a mistake, just a mistake, in Iverson's great document describing in detail exactly how the IBM computer of that day was working. It was a lot of fun, and it was much nicer in those days. You'd get manuals that actually had circuit diagrams for the computer, detailed explanation of how each command works. And one of the things that Ken was able to do with his APL was document precisely how floating divide works in the computer and stuff like that. Except that Larry was the most incredible, what's the word for finding the errors? Proofreader, yeah. Proofreader. Eventually later I introduced him to Doug Hofstadter, who was writing Gödel-Escher-Bach, which 1/3 of you know of, and he also found errors in that and fixed them. So he was good. He was good. I didn't even know that he had a grant of money to go through Stanford for 4 years because of mathematics. I didn't know he was particularly a mathematician until last week's when he was dead. Anyway.
So explain son of a bitch.
What?
Explain son of a bitch.
Samovich. Oh, Samovich.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for getting me back. That's where we might need to go. Yeah. So Ken hears about it, and he says, that son of a bitch breed. Why didn't we talk to him before we published this goddamn thing? And to him, son of a bitch breed means let's hire the guy. So he did, and then son of a bitch hired me. And so I can tell you a few things about Ken. One is you couldn't knock on his door just after lunch. He's taking a nap, and you would be out if you did that, I'm pretty sure. And then also there was this, so somehow or other, it was suggested that I implement transpose. I think APL was in its early years at that time, and so I started into figuring out how to do it. And I wasn't sure using, what do we call the language just before we had Fortran and that kind of thing? I mean, lower, more, close. Assembly, thank you. I had to trade off my nouns to somebody's story, won't get to that story. So I wasn't sure. Anyway, partly as an exercise in APL and partly because I need to detail the thing before I stuck my arms too deeply in this assembly, I simulated it with APL. And I didn't think much of that, but Eugene McDonnell was very kind about it, and he said he thought that was a great concept. And however, it did come back to me when I argued about whether we could get rid of the CT for, what's the T? Encode, yes. And I thought we could do exact arithmetic with that and it would work fine. And Eugene said, well then, okay, go ahead. He said, go ahead, make your point by simulating it. That was too much like work, so I let it go. And Larry suggested at some point, oh, never mind what I did, that's enough, you know who I am. So anyway, he was married to Donna by that time, and I was living, I have to give credit to the third person of the triumvirate, between Ken and Eugene. Aiden, yeah. I never got to know I got to know him hardly at all. It seemed to me he was a pretty gruff guy. But he did lend me his house for the first 2 weeks that I was there. I hope I remember to thank him. I'm not sure. I was young. And I should be keeping track of the time. I'm obviously wondering. 15, okay. If I get serious, I can do it. So Yorktown Heights, I told you. Next time after that I ran into Ken, I was getting out of an elevator when I was at IP Sharp, just for consultation. And I was on the elevator talking to somebody about my biases. And when the door opened, Ken came in and he said, oh God, I should have written down the guy's name. There was a scientist. Oh, do you hate so-and-so? I thought I was the only one that hated him. Like the guy who was always on TV when they needed a scientist. He was an astronomer. Yeah, but he made a mistake in math, so I don't like him. Oh, and then San Antonio. Well, I next saw Ken there because I was giving a talk, and there was some anecdote about O.J. Simpson at the time, because San Antonio was so far out in the country, you know, that they only had two channels that were 100% open to O.J. We had 5 in L.A. And so here's everybody, not everybody. Curtis, hi. I didn't know Curtis in those days. Then we have Eugene and John Gilmore, very interesting character. How many people, is he known to people? Okay. He was obviously a very sharp computer guy, and but I don't think he kept on with APL. I think he was the first employee to some important improvement in computers, and there was a company called Sun something, I'm forgetting the name. But they had 3 starters, and then they hired a guy, which was Gilmore. And then he became quite a political guy in the sense that he's an extreme libertarian. And this is not Larry as young as he, well, we already saw Larry, I think. And Joey Tuttle was with the Toronto company that I mentioned, IB Sharp, yeah. IB Sharp. And he's responsible for reminding me of some of the anecdotes, although he's also with us no more. And the next guy I was going to make, I was going to assume he was an elevator guy, but then I thought it over, it's unlikely, so I thought not to be rude. And I think the other guy I don't just happen not to know the name of. That's who? Paul Berry? Oh, you're right. Yeah. Yeah, why doesn't he have a name tag? Yeah, I like Paul Berry a lot. And I think he was more involved in teaching or planning teaching or writing a little book or something. So I asked Larry 40 years later if he asked me to trap me, and he admitted that was true. He was kind of tricky but honest. Well, now I don't know what I did. Oh, enter. Well, again, I don't know what I did. Can you help me turn this thing back? Oh, all right. It's off here. So one day, about middle 60s, Larry said he wanted to go would you like to take a ride? He wanted to go to Regina, middle of Canada. And I think the point was that I owned a car. Not this one, but the same, I mean, this one is sharper, I guess, but it was the same thing, an MG midget. And so we practiced being able to jump over the doors for a little bit, and then we head off from Palo Alto. And without stopping, just trading seats, we got to Zion National Park after a while, and we paused for about 4 hours, and then we went back to drive for a while, and after some number of hours, we got across the border. No, before that, we went through Montana, and I was sleeping. It was dark by now, and all of a sudden I was awakened, and Larry explained that we'd gone over railroad tracks. You might wonder why, because when you go over railroad tracks are embedded in a road. If you go over them like this, that would explain why I was awakened. So for many years, I would make fun of Montana as being the one out of 50 states that doesn't recess the tracks. But 40 years passed, and I learned the denouement. Then we continued, and I paid for a whole lot of money to get the car fixed. Because it had little ball bearings that were bouncing up and down inside the cylinders, having been shaken off another part of the engine. So we were there for another week. And then, so what happened eventually was that I was in Germany in the 90s on some business at a friend's house, and I checked my answering machine back in California, which I could do by some special company that you press a whole lot of numbers and you get a signal, and then you press a whole lot more numbers, and then you can talk to somebody. And the information that he gave me was so interesting that I actually called him up and talked for a short time, and understood though that he had almost killed himself by flying off a ramp in his car unconscious. So I decided I would get a complete story when I got back. And what happened was he was driving back from northern part of the bay, actually around Oakland where I live now, back to Palo Alto, where we both had lived at one time. And he got off the freeway because he was asleep, and he took an off-ramp, and he went up in the sky, and he landed, and everything was locked, and he survived only because somebody came by who had a dolly that he could pry the back of the door off, and so that was good for Larry, so Larry survived, but Prindle, the name of the car, did not. Now, Prindle, I'm not too hot on cute names for cars. So I got to explain about this a little bit, see if you can understand or anticipate even. And besides that, it didn't seem like Larry. So the reason he called the car Prindle, it was an old van, you see, and it had a plastic arc over the steering wheel. So it looked kind of like this. Park, rear, you know. And so that was the van. And the other thing, the denouement, was what I said. So when we were going through Montana and we hit those rails, Larry was asleep. That's it.